attention to that as we take these notes. Okay, as you well know, as this is review from 8th grade, but the British government had established colonies in the Americas, and the Americas were made up of the 13 British colonies. Things were going well. The British were overseers of the colonies. However, there started to be some unjust because the colonists were expected to follow British law. And this kind of posed a problem because the colonists kind of in their mind had already established colonial law and they had already been following their own governments. For instance, Massachusetts had its own government, Pennsylvania had its own government, the Virginians had already created their own government. So they really didn't really see themselves as citizens of England. They saw themselves as Virginians or Pennsylvanians or wherever they were from. However, they were still British subjects. They were required to follow British law. So this kind of served as a problem. In the 1660s, the Parliament in England decided that they were going to pass what is known as the Navigation Acts. And the Navigation Acts pretty much banned the colonies from selling their goods to any other country except for Britain. So it just said that the colonists couldn't trade with any other country except Britain. And this caused a lot of problems because people were very upset. This limited their opportunities to make money, and it was another example of mercantilism. The British were really trying to control and maintain mercantilism and use the colonies to get wealthy. On top of the restrictions on trade, the colonists were also having to pay extremely high taxes on goods that they imported from France and from the Dutch. So the colonists were very upset by the tariffs, which, as we know, is a tax on imported goods. They were upset about the tariffs, and they were really upset about the restrictions of trade that England was putting on them. And the way that they do that, in 1765, Parliament decides to pass the Stamp Act. And this Stamp Act was just a law that required every document, every kind of paper to have a certain English stamp on it, which would tax the colonists on things like paper, legal documents, any kind of will, a deed, any kind of newspapers. It was taxing them, and they were very upset about this because they didn't feel like it was their job to pay back the debt of England. They had never really paid taxes to the British before either. So they started to feel like their rights as colonists were being very violated. And that's where we get taxation without representation. The colonists started to feel like because nobody was over in England, no one was in Parliament representing the American colonies, they felt like they didn't have the right to be taxed. So that's where we get that taxation without representation. So the colonists, what they do is they boycott the goods. They start to protest. They're able to get the Stamp Act eventually repealed, but the colonists are still upset because, as you know, there was a series of acts and laws and taxes that were continuing to be passed on the colonists. So what the end result is, the colonists decide that eventually they're going to want independence from the British. They form the First Continental Congress, and they make a list of grievances or some complaints. They send it to King George III in England, but there's no attention being paid to them. So what they do is they decide that they will form the Second Continental Congress, and they decide to declare war on the British. And this is when the American Revolution starts. Along with the American Revolution, the Second Continental Congress, all from the thinkers of the Enlightenment, especially of John Locke, Rousseau, and Montesquieu. And if you remember, those were the Enlightenment thinkers that really supported democratic feelings, and they would be the ones who would support a democratic republic form of government. So in 1776, at the Second Continental Congress, Thomas Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence. And this Declaration of Independence was firmly based on the ideas of John Locke, and it argued for the natural rights of man. The Declaration of Independence also argues that the whole primary purpose of government is to protect the natural and individual rights of the people. So they kind of do this because, if you remember, Locke says that if a ruler is unjust, then the people have a right to rebel against him. And so the Declaration of Independence is pretty much the colonists saying, we feel like our ruler has been unjust, therefore we have the right to rebel against him. The Declaration of Independence includes those unalienable rights, and as you know from 8th grade, an unalienable right is a right that cannot be taken away or transferred in any way. And the 3 unalienable rights that Jefferson includes in the Declaration of Independence is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is an excerpt from the Declaration of Independence, and while you guys are listening to me read this, I want you to kind of think about where John Locke would have influence in this document. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their power from the consent of the governed. So from that excerpt, I want you guys to think of ways that John Locke influenced the Declaration of Independence. Go ahead and pause the video and think of some ways that John Locke influenced the Declaration. Okay, you should see that the unalienable rights are very similar to the natural rights of men that John Locke talks about. Also, John Locke discusses in some of his theories that the people are the one who give the power to the government. And right here in the Declaration of Independence, it talks about that men derive their powers, or that the government should derive their powers from the consent of the governed. And that just means that the government needs to get their power from the people. So that's what is pretty much taking from all of Locke's theories and translating them into the Declaration of Independence. After the Americans win independence, they decide that they need a constitution. They need something to outline their government. And so they adopt what is known as the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation was not a great document. In fact, it was not used for that long. It establishes a republic, which, as you guys know, a republic means representative government. However, it creates a very weak national government. States don't have the power to, the national government does not have the power to tax. They have no power to create armies. Everything is left to the states, which starts to create problems. The states are given way too much power. In a particular instance, this leads to Shays' Rebellion. And in Shays' Rebellion, it was about a violent protest in Massachusetts because Massachusetts was putting way too many tariffs on goods from neighboring states. They were taxing their citizens way too high, and there was no way for the national government to control that. So Daniel Shays, he demands that the states lower taxes. The Constitutional Convention, they meet together in 1787, and it's made up of people like George Washington, James Madison, who is considered the father of our Constitution, John Adams, among other people, are there to rewrite and to ratify a more practical Constitution. These men, they bring knowledge of John Locke, Baron de Montesquieu, and Rousseau, and they come together and they create a government in the U.S. Constitution. With the Constitution is written and ratified in 1787. It included a Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, as well as some other parts. The Constitution has got 7 extremely important principles. Okay, it's got 7 important principles, and you need to write each of these down, and I've got ways for you to remember them. The first principle that you guys need to know about is checks and balances, and this just means no branch of government has more power than the other, and they issue checks on each other. Okay, they make sure that no branch is more powerful than any other. Like the executive branch is not powerful than the legislative, and the legislative is not more powerful than the judicial. This was an idea from Montesquieu that he came up with, and he issued when he talked about separating the powers. The second principle of our Constitution that is very important is separation of powers, and that just means that our government is separated into 3 branches that have different jobs: judicial, legislative, and executive. Again, this was another idea from the Baron de Montesquieu that came up with and decided to enact in our government. So we're taking this Enlightenment thought and we are applying it to our national government. The third principle that we came up with was federalism. And this is just meaning that power is divided between national and state government. So power is shared between the states and the national government. The states take care of certain things and the national government takes care of certain things. And that was really helpful when the Articles of Confederation, their main problem was states had too much power. Well, they remedied that, they fixed that by enacting this idea of federalism. The fourth principle is individual rights, and the individual rights just guarantees rights of the people. We can find our individual rights in the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. The fifth principle is limited government. This means all people, including rulers, including our president, including people in the government, are subject to the law. They can still get in trouble. Okay, this just means that our government is not unlimited. Our president does not have unlimited power. There are things put in place that keep him in check, and can be subject to the law. Our sixth principle is popular sovereignty. And that just means that people have supreme power. And right here I have my little trick in how you remember what popular sovereignty means. But it's popular sovereignty. The people have the power. People have the power. That's how you remember popular sovereignty. And the final is republic. Republic is a government in which representatives are elected. And this actually is getting cut off by your video, but I wrote at the bottom, and I want you to write on your paper, republic equals Rome equals representative. We talked about that. You wrote it on your papers in the fall. But a republic was formed in Rome, and it is a representative government. When you have a republic, you elect representatives, and that's a way that you can remember what a republic is.